mechanism that would ensure a federation, a monetary union, and finally a federation for East Africa, the 5 stages of our union in East Africa. That treaty, Madam Speaker, is under threat of violation when we see certain violations in the region. It cannot therefore be said, Madam Speaker, that the violations of human rights that occur in our brother or sister states must be viewed with concern, because we must move towards implementing the treaty. And that is why we must see a working East African Legislative Assembly. I understand, Madam Speaker, that the Assembly is not as functional as it ought to be, and that should be a concern of this House, because the Assembly, some of the members of the Assembly have not received their salaries for several months, Madam Speaker, because some of the countries in East Africa do not contribute their share. For the avoidance of doubt, Madam Speaker, Kenya has consistently contributed her share to the ESC. And Madam Speaker, as we deal with human rights violations in the region, we must be alive to the fact that these issues touch all of us and concern all of us, and we must work a framework of a healthy East Africa and East African states that obey human rights. For the motion, Madam Speaker, let me say this. This motion must be amended to make sense, because you cannot, as you say, Madam Speaker, provide protection to a hungry crowd. The police need better service. The police need a better working environment to be able to deliver to the people of this country. We need more policemen. And aside the litigation that is going on, Madam Speaker, we need policemen to be employed so that these policemen, Madam Speaker, can serve the people of this country, because we are moving to a period where we need even services of these police persons, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Senators, pursuant to my powers under Article 45(2), I wish to direct that we move on to order number 23. Thank you. Honourable Senators, the mover is not around to reply, so we defer the replying to the motion. And as earlier indicated, pursuant to 45(2), I wish to call on order number 23. Thank you.
Oh, I thought. Oh.
Order number 23, the Public Finance Management Amendment number 4 Bill, National Assembly Bills number 45 of 2024, second reading.
Majority Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise to move that the Public Finance Management Amendment Bill, National Assembly Bill number 45 of 2024, be now read a second time. Madam Speaker, this PFM Amendment Bill number 45 of 2024 is a particularly interesting one. This is one of the many bills, Madam Speaker, I have hoped that we'd consider over time. But like I have learned, Madam Speaker, everyone's jobs ends up being no one's job. Many times we say these things, then we leave it, and we assume that somebody will think for us. I cannot remember the number of times while commenting on BPS that almost every senator has made this request that this amendment is about, that the House be granted sufficient time to consider the budget policy statement, that it is not tenable, the 14 days that we are granted within which to listen to the public, make our decisions as committee, compile it, and bring it to the House. In fact, if possible, Madam Speaker, it will make more sense, other than have it compiled by the budget committee as is a tradition, to have actually the individual committees present their findings individually. You have the chair for ICT come here, and give their perspective and their view on the proposed bill. Then you have the Chair for Health come and explain to us why National Treasury still want to continue hanging on to stipend for community health promoters as opposed to releasing that money to counties so that governors can pay, Madam Speaker, and so on and so forth. There are many things which I feel if we had sufficient time to consider the BPS, then the House will be better armed, actually, to respond to the call of interrogating our budget. This bill was published, actually, in the Kenya Gazette Supplement number 190 of 2024, last year, November. It's actually taken almost a year plus in the National Assembly. The principal object of this bill, of course, is to amend Act 412A, which is to extend the time within which Parliament considers and makes recommendation to the BPS, to extend the time within which the CS for Finance complies with the debt management provisions, and to put in place a framework for the implementation of accrual accounting in government. Madam Speaker, the extension of time within which Parliament considers and makes recommendations to the BPS from 14 days to 21 days will allow Parliament sufficient time to carry out public participation, debate, and make cogent recommendations on vital budget document. I need not emphasize, my colleagues, many times you've had each of us say how 14 days is such a short period. Of course, you understand that we work in a very tight fiscal cycle of only 12 months, which many times, Madam Speaker, when we resume at the beginning of the next session, around February of next year, Madam Speaker, it's a fast business that awaits us. And within that time, we have a short time to consider this, send it back to National Treasury, they put it together, then they send the proposed budget to the Assembly, who have to carry out public participation and all those things, especially remembering that in a budget like the one for last year, for next year actually, it's the last budget before the elections, and therefore, Madam Speaker, has a lot of interest. Further to that, Madam Speaker, Clause 2 of this bill proposes to amend Section 25(7) of the PFM Act to provide that Parliament shall not later than 21 days after the BPS is submitted to Parliament table and discuss a report containing its recommendation and pass a resolution to adopt it with or without amendments. The extended time for consideration of statement by Parliament from 14 to 21 days, and to amend Section 25(9) of the Act to provide the National Treasury shall publish and publicize the BPS not later than 22 days after the submission of the statement to Parliament. These extend time for publishing and publication to 21 days. I have explained that. Section 50 of this Act also imposes certain obligations relating to debt management to the Cabinet Secretary for Finance. One, these include, under Section 52, that borrowing by the national government shall not exceed 55% of the gross domestic product in present value terms under Section 52C, the amendment that we did here at the beginning of this term, Madam Speaker. The debt threshold set out in 52 came into force in 2023. The bill, therefore, to provide a different date for coming into force of this provision. Clause 3 of the bill proposes to delete Section 52C and submit the new session that provide the Cabinet Secretary to ensure that borrowing by the national government complies with the threshold under Section 52A, Madam Speaker. We had a long debate about this, and I believe that the Budget and Finance Committee of this House will actually lead us into making a more reasoned decision on this particular proposal during the Committee of the Whole stage. The Clause 4, Madam Speaker, is to amend Section 194(1) to provide that the Accounting Standards Board shall provide a framework for the implementation of accrual accounting in government, and further the board shall prescribe risk management framework. The bill further proposes to amend 194 by inserting a new subsection 6 to provide for transition period to 3 years to accrual system of accounting in government. There are many people who've been calling for this because it basically means, Madam Speaker, that we shall be spending on reality of what we have as opposed to the current system where we believe and hope that there's some amount that we'll collect, and therefore hoping has gotten us to where we are today, where close to 70% of our collections, Madam Speaker, end up paying debt. Therefore, this is a simple amendment, but with very consequential findings, which I hope that colleagues can find time to debate share their thoughts about it. I'll be particularly interested by the findings of the Budget and Finance Committee on this matter, so that we know whether indeed they have considered the requests that have been made here, Madam Speaker, and lead us. With those many remarks, Madam Speaker, I beg to move and request Senator Professor Tom Ojienda to second.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I second the motion for the proposed amendments. Madam Speaker, it is clear that timelines are important to the extent, Madam Speaker, that budget policy statements must be debated within a sufficient time, and the proposal to amend the sections in question, Section 25 and other sections, is an important section. Madam Speaker, these amendments will improve the substance of business that this House will undertake, and in the light of the proposed timelines and timeframes as per the proposals, Madam Speaker, I second.
Honorable Senators, I propose the question that the Public Finance Management Amendment number 4 Bill, National Assembly Bills number 45 of 2024 be now read a second time. Senator Mtata.
My lady, Madam Speaker, the Public Finance Management Act is one of the key pieces of legislation in this country. It operationalizes Chapter 12 of the Constitution on public finance. It has many good things, it has many bad things. And I think the budget policy statement, which is the broad, the broad outline of the budget that is made annually, which annually is the broad guideline for the annual budgets, is a very, very important process. And I agree with the mover of the motion and the seconder that this is a very, very important amendment that needs to be done. We need to be given adequate time to interrogate and audit the proposals for the budget, and if possible, be able to ferret out cases of budgeted corruption, which may be padded in the budget, intended distortions of equitable sharing, and stuff like that. So the amendment is extremely important, and I would urge my colleagues in this House to support that amendment, that we be given adequate time to scrutinize the budget proposals. 14 days are inadequate, and as the mover said, the majority leader, within those 14 days, we are supposed to have the committee meet and look at it, maybe, and as it's a parliamentary tradition, subject it to public participation, and then come back, subject it to debate in this House, and then vote on it. That kind of restriction reduces this House to a rubber stamp, whereby we have to decide between having a bad budget or having no budget at all. And that leads to a situation whereby sometimes things that are passed in this House, that when you encounter them later on, you say, how come this thing went through the House unnoticed? So it's a very, very important proposal that we bring that out. In moving the motion, the Honorable Majority Leader made a reference to the budget ceiling in the Public Finance Management B and C. They address the question of borrowing. and they require that borrowing must be clearly indicated in the budget, with the proposals of how it is going to be repaid, the loans are going to be repaid. When you come to a budget ceiling that says that you are going to borrow 55% of the GDP, it violates that provision, that in every budget, Parliament must set the limits of that borrowing, and it must justify whether there is capacity to repay those loans or not. That's what the Constitution requires. A budget statement, a ceiling, a debt ceiling, that structure is that Congress had full control of money. Unlike us here, who have full control nothing. You saw Congress the other day they have shut down government for 40 days because they could not agree how the money was going to be used. Money is controlled by the House. Today, I think it's when the senators voted and some crossed over and the 60 threshold was met. So there might be a minimum opening of the House in the UK, in the US. But that as it may be, they still have the debt ceiling issue. And the debt ceiling since 2017, when it was introduced during the First World War, to allow the American executive procure, then come to tell Parliament how it has been procuring to fight that war, has remained in the US. And today, the US has got one of the biggest debts in the world. It's the most indebted country in the world. The only luck they have is that they print the dollar. And when they print the dollar, they cause inflation outside because we also use the dollar. So they are covered that way. But the debt ceiling resulted in Congress losing control over borrowing by the American government. And it has led to that problem. In our circumstances, we also have the other problem whereby, realistically speaking, debts are paid from taxes. We don't pay debt from GDP. In a country like Kenya, where I think 10 or less % of the population owns 90% of the economy, the GDP is a very misleading figure when you come to debt. Because when you go to taxation, that 10% that owns 9% of the economy will only pay 30% of their income or something like that to the debt. And so the GDP will not reflect in taxes. Then we shall be borrowing a debt that we cannot finance, that we cannot pay back. So we need to go back, and that amendment should be expanded to deal with the amendment to remove the debt ceiling as a guiding threshold for borrowing. And we go back to Article 220, Clause 1, B and C of the Constitution, which prescribes that in every budget, we must address the question of public debt. In every budget. So that we can be able to determine whether we have capacity to pay what we have borrowed or not. And if we are borrowing, how do we intend to finance that loan? So that when the loan is being borrowed, we must be able to look through long term and see how is this loan going to be repaid? What activities are going to repay this loan? Number two, that long-term look will also give us a chance to look at Article 201 of the Constitution, Section C, which requires that the benefits of borrowing must be spread between the current generations and the future generations. So this amendment, and it's also good that we need more time to look at the budget proposals so that we can also be able to interrogate the budget to determine whether it addresses that particular requirement that the future generations must be taken care of in every budget that we make. So, Madam Speaker, this is a very, very important amendment, which I support. which I plead that this House considers favorably. And as we go along, we must also look at other aspects of the Public Finance Management Act. In mind, I have Section 11 of the Public Finance Management Act, which establishes the National Treasury as a ministry of the national government. We have 48 governments. When you look at Article 251, Clause A, Madam Speaker, it requires Parliament to establish, by an act of Parliament, to establish the National Treasury. If you look at the design of our Constitution, we have 48 governments. This House has one of its core businesses is to protect devolution. When the Treasury becomes part of the national government, devolution suffers. And that's why you have found that the counties are unable to get money on time. The law requires that they get money by the 15th of every month. We hardly see that happening in our counties, because the national government, which has hijacked the Treasury, using Section 11, only gives counties money after it has had its fill. You have heard even the person of His Excellency, the President, say that under my government I've ensured that statement should never be made by anybody. We need an independent treasury that can serve the 48 governments based on what Parliament has passed, not on what the President desires. And Section 11, Madam Speaker, which purports to operationalize Article 251, Clause A, Clause 1, states, if I may paraphrase it, states something like the National Treasury comprises the Minister for Finance, the Permanent Secretary for Finance, and the departments. Now, Madam Speaker, as you know, the Minister for Finance is an appointee of the President. The PS for Finance is an appointee of the President. They don't enjoy security of tenure. So basically what we have done through that Public Finance, Section 11 of the Public Finance Management Act, is to make the President the treasurer of the Republic of Kenya. And we have seen that in practical terms, parliamentarians make a budget. They pass a budget. We are going to have to do budget policy statement. It will go through the whatever motions. It ends up in the National Assembly. It's passed. It goes into for the President, he signs it into law. It becomes an appropriation act. For all practical purposes, it is usually shelved. The budget that is then implemented is a budget that is not approved by Parliament. You will see that whenever the President goes to a public function, even a funeral, you will find the MPs from the area standing up and telling him they need a bridge, they need a road, they need whatever. All those things are not in the budget they passed. And the President will stand up and grant them. Because we have subverted the Constitution to a point whereby, whereas we are required to manage this country using the budget, it has become a formality. What runs the country is what the President determines. Right now, we got a loan of 13 billion, I read in the papers, from the World Bank, for Nyota Yetu. Nyota Yetu is nowhere in the budget. It's nowhere in any. It's tying us to a big loan of 13 billion. Because the President wanted it to be done, it's going to be done. You have seen a lot of loans being signed whenever the President travels. These loans are not in the budget. They have not been approved by Parliament. They get signed and are binding the people of Kenya. But why is all that happening? You again go to the Public Finance Management Act. What has it done? Whereas the Constitution requires only Parliament to approve borrowing and what have you, it has vested power in the Cabinet Secretary for the Treasury to be able to borrow loans. And so we end up with a very big, huge debt stock of odious debt in this country. The majority leader talked of 70%. of the money we collect going to pay debts, which means 70 shillings out of every 100 shillings that the Kenya Revenue Authority collects goes to pay loans. The correct figure is worse than that. When I did a study on that odious debt last year, by 30th November, it was 82 shillings out of every 100 shillings that the Treasury collects that goes to service debt. The government is left virtually with nothing. The other day, I read in the East African, I've not verified it, I read in the East African, the figure had grown to 92 shillings, 92%, 92 shillings of every 100 shillings that the KRA collects is going to service debt. Then we have reached a situation whereby we are borrowing money to pay debt when it's very clear in the law that we cannot borrow money to pay debt. The most known example was the one that happened the other day in February 2024. We borrowed more than 2 billion shillings to pay the Eurobond debts. Yet the law, Article 214 of the Constitution, makes debts a direct charge on the consolidated fund. So we begin wondering, why is it that we are spending all that money, debt is supposed to be a direct charge on the consolidated fund, how come then that we are still borrowing to pay debt? You find you have got this thing called domestic borrowing. Very clear in the Public Finance Management Act that you can only borrow domestically to sustain cash flows, which must be repaid within the year, short term. You must borrow. Any other borrowing must be through Parliament. You have seen infrastructure bonds being floated by government. They have not been debated in Parliament. You have seen treasury bonds being sold in this country, binding the country for many years. Is not been approved by Parliament. You have got these rollovers that you see in the statement of actual revenue and net exchequer issues that the Treasury publishes every 21 days after the end of the month. When you read those statements, you find you have even a rollover that has been running from 1979. You ask yourself, what is happening with the public finance management in this country? And so the law that says Public Finance Management Act is a very, very important act in terms of managing the economy of this country, in terms of achieving, I saw the president say the other day, something I've always been saying, and I was happy he said it, that we can make Kenya a first world country right now. But you cannot make Kenya a first world country right now unless we go that way of fiscal discipline. If we go borrowing and throwing money around, throwing good money to bad problems, we are not going to achieve that. So this motion is extremely important for this country. Let us get ample time to interrogate, audit, and ferret out any bad things from our budgets so that we can be able to come out to find a budget that can run this country. But I would request the movers to consider even amending those articles, Article 57, B, C, and D, which allows money borrowed by the national government to be banked offshore and not in the consolidated fund, as required by the Constitution in Article 206. We must look at Section 11 of the Public Finance Management Act and also repeal it and go and create an act of parliament that creates the ministry, and that creates the treasury, not as a ministry of the national government, but as an independent institution governed by professionals and oversighted by parliament, whereby the control of money is then taken away from the president and vested in parliament. Where money sits with the president or with the executive and the power of the purse are together, you end up with what you call the imperial presidency, or an emperor, who is a distributor of goods and services. And you can see our president, wherever he goes, he carries a bag of goodies, which are not in the budget. But that's how that's what the law has done. So we should come back and put the power of the purse back in the House, so that even the president cannot have money to give away. If he wants to do something, he must propose it to Parliament through the budget. And if I want something done in my area, it should not depend on my proximity to the president. And you know you cannot approach power standing straight, you have to bow. It must depend on my relationship with fellow MPs whom I can lobby and negotiate, and we put it in the budget, and then it becomes law, and then it's implemented. So with those few remarks, Madam Speaker, I support the motion with the proposed amendments. Thank you.
I don't see another request for speaking, so the mover may reply.
Mr. Speaker, sorry, apologies, Madam Speaker, I want to thank Senator Mtata and Senator Professor Tomo Jenda for their thoughts on this very interesting topic. This is about the future of our country. Madam Speaker, when the public debt debate came to Parliament in 2018 or 2019, I moved on the floor of this House to oppose it vehemently because I knew that I'm doing so for the sake of the future generations of this country, who will bear a great burden beyond which the call of any parent or adult who is in a position of responsibility should pass over to the next generation. Unfortunately, Parliament speaks through the votes of the majority, and they had their way that day. But I lived to be happy and see that day, Madam Speaker, when under tremendous pressure, it was confirmed to the country the level of debt exposure that this country was left in after the 10 years of the Jubilee administration. In fact, Madam Speaker, you know, I heard the president, former president, the other day say that he spent the first 2.5 years of his presidency finishing the projects of President Kibaki. President Uhuru should know that we are in the third year and we can't finish his problems. We are still trying to sort it, which is the greatest gift he gave a country, which is skyrocketed public debt that we are trying to solve up to this date, Madam Speaker. And it's unfortunate because we don't appear to yet have grasped this problem and appreciate that this is a threat even to our national security. Part of the dissatisfaction that you see with many members of the public today is on account of an economy that is cash-starved. And how does an economy become cash-starved, Madam Speaker? It becomes cash-starved because the biggest consumer of goods and services, which is the government, doesn't spend. And the reason they don't spend is because they have nothing to spend. Because everything that we collect, Madam Speaker, unfortunately, never leaves the proximity of Harambee Avenue. It's collected at Times Towers, heads 50 meters to the National Treasury, and off it goes to pay debt of people who have managed their resources better than us over the years. And it's really a problem which, Madam Speaker, if we do not address with the finality that it deserves, we shall live to regret in days coming by. I must appreciate, Madam Speaker, that at the beginning of 2022, the World Bank actually had predicted that there were 6 African nations that were likely to default on their debt and come down under a debt strain. 5 of those economies, unfortunately, actually defaulted on their debt, and to date, their currency has never recovered. I think you have Ethiopia, Ghana, and a country called the other 3, Madam Speaker. Kenya is the only one that survived, but we are not yet out of the woods, and we shouldn't feel proud about the situation that we are ourselves in. Despite the tight fiscal space that we continue to work in today, the threat for defaulting still exists, Madam Speaker. And we must always bear that in mind every time we carry on our responsibilities. And it's time we have a prudent or an adult conversation in this country about how we manage the resources. 2.4 trillion shillings, Senator Mtata, is not small money. Forget about the debt that you're talking about that you're paying. We asked the other week here, who are these people that we are paying 80 billion Kenya shillings every month in form of compensation to public workers? 80 billion is not small money. It is actually nearly a third of the funds or a fifth of the funds that we devolve to counties. Yet we spend it on less than 1 million people. Yet, if it is a fifth, it means it takes care of nearly a fifth of the counties that are in this country. Nearly 10 counties, Madam Speaker, that has populations of millions of people. But those resources are being consumed by less than 1 million citizens that live off the public wage bill. And it's something that we must confront, because it is the biggest strain on our public resources over and above repayment of our debt. And I like the conversation which the minister began, but I have not seen him advance a decision, difficult as it may be. You know the problem in this country, that's why I disagreed with Senator Cherargei when he brought here a motion the other day saying, oh, we need to increase the stipend for, I don't know, interns. And I said, what is wrong with us? Haven't we realized how much of the overstrain we are putting on the national purse by insisting that everybody who comes to demonstrate outside Parliament here must be absorbed on permanent and pensionable basis? In fact, Madam Speaker, that is something that we need to propose to the country and have a conversation with them on the realities of our economic situation and why it is not possible to continue employing at the rate at which we are doing. Despite the fact that there are people who retire, others either on account of age or illness or due to natural situations like death, Madam Speaker, it still is not enough a measure to give us the comfort to employ the numbers that I see being employed on a daily basis. Members of Budget and Finance Committee must lead us as the House as we look in this law to think through and see whether what is being proposed to us makes sense, particularly on the issue of debt anchor. Is it not possible, and I had asked this question earlier, that if you want to have a different commencement date, no problem, but at least fix it in law how much fiscal deficit is allowed year on year, so that it is known for a fact that if you ever try to do a budget beyond a certain fiscal deficit, then it is considered an illegal budget. That's the only way we can assure the country that we are working on a strict fiscal framework. Otherwise, Madam Speaker, if we just pass on the date and say that the commencement for this maybe will be 2028 or I don't know, 2029, it's fine. But what is the assurance that the Treasury will comply, that our colleagues in the National Assembly will observe, yet we know what is happening? Senator Mtata, I'm not sure whether what you're proposing will work, because the National Assembly has been a big player and active participant in this mess that we find ourselves in. CDF, which began at a paltry 50, 60 million hardly 10 years ago, today is over 200 million Kenya shillings. And you can see the appetite, the way it is increasing. All these projects that you see being lined up in the budget, some of them beyond the proposal of Treasury, are because our colleagues in the National Assembly have figured how to rally their colleagues and put in a project here and another one there without the final consideration that we don't have the resources to live large like they're encouraging us to do. It is unfortunate, Madam Speaker, that even as we speak this, we are fully aware that unless we put a stop by law on this issue of debt increase, and the only way you can do it is through the means that I have proposed, that even if you give them additional time, then guide, show, work out scientifically year on year. If the fiscal deficit for last year was 4.9, then reduce it to 4.5 in the subsequent financial year. Adequately in the next financial year, bring it down to 4 until we get to that point. Otherwise, it will get still to that 2028 and another amendment will come. This time proposing that, oh, maybe we now try and achieve a particular target. Because of the effects of politics. The unfortunate thing in all this is politics. At the end of the day, when the head of state and members of parliament and even us senators, we visit our constituents, there's a demand for a road here, a demand for a bridge on the other part, And we are all pushing back that resource basket. Yet development is not evenly balanced. And this is a challenge that we continue to face up to this date, Madam Speaker, where there are regions that have had their share, but because of the convenient politics of the day, others continue to struggle. We were with you in Busia. You saw the kind of traffic mess that you find yourself in on the road from Kisumu to Busia, an international highway.
Order, Senator Edio. Okay, we can't hear the speaker properly.
I was talking about the road from Kisumu to Busia, for example. Yet, we see billions being appropriated each year to sections of the country which, to the best of my knowledge, have actually don't, okay, I'm not sure whether don't deserve, Madam Speaker. For them, it is not a priority as much as it is, for example, for people of that section of the country. You can see the number of accidents. I think even Senator Mtata previously, you had an accident on that road. Yeah, he survived actually narrowly. Because it's a thin road, despite the fact that you have tankers, you have trailers that are moving goods to Uganda. You know, prioritization of all these things. Yet, we cannot do it because of the influence of politics and patronage of our national resources. So, Senator Mtata, I'm not sure whether leaving it in the hands of politicians like you and me will still solve this situation, despite the fact you can move it from the executive and bring it to parliament and make it even worse. We must learn fiscal discipline by agreeing on a framework. Look at what has happened to Americans. They've shut down their government for almost 40 days because they couldn't agree on what is the prioritization of expenditure. We must get to that place where when we want to live beyond our means, we tell each other that this is the resource pool that is available, agree on where to spend it. Nothing more, nothing less. Anything else that we are discussing here, to the best of my knowledge, Madam Speaker, is waste of precious time. I do not want to take long, Madam Speaker, because I can see that we are actually out of time. But I think this is a topic that we need to have a better conversation. And Senator Mtata, we need to think more deeply and do something in the House beyond just what you are saying, because unfortunately not many people follow this kind of conversations. Thank you, Senator Ojienda, for your contributions as well. Madam Speaker, with those many remarks, I beg to reply. I request, in accordance with Standing Order number 66.3, that we defer the putting of a question. I thank you.
It is so deferred. Next order.
Order number 24, the Wildlife Conservation and Management Amendment Bill, Senate Bills number 46 of 2023, second reading.
The order is deferred because the mover is not here. Next order.
Order number 25, the Wildlife Conservation and Management Amendment Bill, Senate Bills number 49 of 2023, second reading.
Also deferred. Next order.
Order number 26, the Narcotic Drugs and Psychotropic Substances Control Amendment Bill, Senate Bills number 1 of 2024, second reading.
Honorable Senators, it is now 6:30 p.m., time to adjourn the Senate. The Senate, therefore, stands adjourned until tomorrow, Wednesday, 12th November 2025 at 9:30 a.m.